Welcome to another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw. Your host, Mark Ruiz Evans. We've been doing this for a very long time. We're happy to do it, bringing you the information the media just won't make sure you're informed of, talking about California secession, the reason for California independence, and how America continues to fall apart. Well, let's cover it right now. But first, a little bit of branding. Check this out, and we'll be right back with all sorts of incredible information about how America is quickly falling apart. Not because we wanted to, but because Americans are doing it in real time to themselves. Welcome. Appreciate you being here. Okay, well, let's get right into it. So we have a couple different things. I'm just going to start covering the news, and then we'll get into some really juicy academic articles at the end. But first, we're just going to start covering the news that you probably were not informed of. So first thing I want to show you is this right here. No, not that. Kathy Griffin was slammed for saying Republicans will start a civil war. Here's what she said. If you don't want a civil war, vote for Democrats in November. If you do want a civil war, vote Republican. Yeah, she said that at the beginning of this month recently. Now, that was already misinterpreted. Here are some liberals saying people purposely misconstruing what Kathy Griffin tweeted is so 2022. She meant Republicans want a civil war and Dems don't. It's not a threat, it's an observation. Same thing, MAGA Republicans are riled up because Kathy Griffin pointed them out for being domestic terrorists. Now they're playing the victim card, insisting she's calling for civil war. Well, I just want to say that those people, this person and this person, are wrong. So maybe Kathy Griffin did not mean that Democrats were going to start a civil war. But in the English language, this phrase means you are threatening a civil war. If you don't want a civil war, vote for Democrats in November, or else we'll cause a civil war. That's how that reads in the English language. If you do want a civil war, vote Republican because Democrats will be so upset that they'll attack. So Kathy Griffin saying, well, I didn't mean that. I meant the Republicans were going to do it. And other people are coming to her help. And maybe that's what she meant. But I got to tell you, that sentence, the way that it's phrased, is a threat. So published author, English language is not really that variable. What she said is basically, if you don't vote liberal, we're going to start a civil war. Now, maybe that's not what she meant, but that's how that reads. So people are not wrong for feeling that you basically just threatened civil war if Democrats don't get their way going into the election. And it's even worse because liberals won't call her out for that. They'll say, oh, no, she was right on saying that. So here's Kathy Griffin pouring fuel on the fire. And as we routinely talk about, it's bad enough when someone insults you, but if you don't even understand their insult and you misconstrue it and people don't even know what they're being insulted by, like I'm being insulted by somebody, but I don't even understand the insult and I insult them back and they don't even understand my insult, that's worse than us insulting each other. So she's throwing fuel on the fire. Liberals are giving her a total pass that will only exacerbate the anger of conservatives that she was able to threaten them and then get backed up by the left doing it, which is basically what happened. I just showed you here and here. And hey, I don't like Trump either. I don't want Republicans to win. I don't want civil war, but there's, kind of a limit to the BS. Okay, here we go. Roe v. Wade will spark a digital civil war from Wired magazine. Also out this month, new privacy and expression laws vary from state to state that will ignite a nightmare for platforms and users' rights. For the past 10 years, primary threats to U.S. internet freedoms have come from abroad. Like countries in China, Russia, and India have erected barriers to the flow of information. In the wake of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, however, the biggest threat to borderless internet now comes from within the United States. So here's Wired magazine, a well-respected internet, new tech issues related to new tech magazine. And they're saying, the good old days 10 years ago was a foreign nation being the biggest threat on the internet. Now the biggest threat is your fellow Americans. And it's going to get even worse over Roe v. Wade. So here's Wired threatening a civil war coming. And then it's going to be sparked first on the internet. Maybe people will have an internet civil war, and then that will exacerbate tensions to the point that they start a physical civil war. Remember, when we talked about civil war, you can have little sparks that grow into the big fire. So bad news. Also, turns out that Joe Biden gave a speech where he said 78 million Americans were basically enemies of the state. All the MAGA Republicans were bad. He basically dismissed 78 million Americans. Now, on the TV, you had a lot of liberals coming out saying that was great, that was awesome. Turns out that's all garbage. So 56% of the country opposed Joe Biden's address. Joe Biden won the presidency with 52%. So there are more people opposed to Joe Biden's speech and saying, wow, you just exacerbated tensions in America and made the division even worse by calling out 78 million people saying you're enemies of the state. And with that horrible blood red backdrop with the active duty Marines, it looked like a Nazi speech. 56%, clear majority of Americans are thinking that. That means a lot of liberals think that it was bad. There's not 56% of Americans are Republicans. So a huge chunk of liberals also think, Joe Biden, you just made it worse with your speech. You exacerbated tensions, and it's already pretty bad. So remember this. 56% say Joe Biden's speech exacerbated tensions as we're going into midterms. Here's this article out beginning middle of September saying, hey, there's going to be a civil war digitally as we're going into midterms. And then here we go. Biden meets with historians to talk about the possibility of a civil war. And it draws criticism. And that happened September 1st. Now, I want to show you a few quotes from that article. This is the NPR article. And here's the key quote from that article. Stage 3, and violence may need only a triggering event akin to the 1860 election of Lincoln that precipitated secession. Perhaps, as Lindsey Graham, Republican South Carolina, warns, widespread rioting would follow an indictment of Trump, or claims of another stolen election in 2024 or even 2022 could ignite hostilities. So they're talking about how in this NPR article, because this all relates. So here's the NPR article. Biden met with a bunch of historians who studied the Civil War. They said the Civil War could happen in America again. That apparently drew a lot of criticism here in this article. But when they got into the details of how a civil war could happen, what they said was basically the Civil War could happen in the future because there could be some triggering event. So you're not having people shooting at each other directly. There wasn't really a war until Lincoln got elected. Then it stepped up to the next level. You had bleeding Klansmen before that, but that was out on the periphery. People saw those examples, but they hadn't started shooting at each other until a triggering event like the election of Lincoln. Here, official historians from America, experts on the Civil War, are saying you could have another triggering event that could start a new civil war. And that could be things like riots in the streets because Donald Trump was indicted and thrown in prison, or it could be claims of a stolen election in the midterms, or claims of a stolen election in 2024. So here's these Civil War historians saying a triggering event like Trump's indictment or going to prison, like a stolen election midterms, like a stolen election for the presidency in 2024, could start the Civil War. And then I want to show you this again. The end of Roe will spark a digital civil war, almost like there could be a spark that causes a civil war. All this talking on the internet with Roe v. Wade and different privacy things could be a spark to cause a digital civil war. I'm saying it could be a spark to cause the full thing. So this article is talking about all you need is a spark for things to get going. Wired magazine saying, hey, that spark's coming. The Hill magazine says that spark already happened. You got 56% of the country terrified by the speech by the president. All we need is a little spark for secession to pop off. Like maybe Joe Biden saying 78% of the country are enemies of the state and 56% of the country saying that's horrible and divisive. Like maybe we have a digital civil war, which kind of creates sort of a digital bleeding Kansas input into the American consciousness, precipitating us leading to civil war. Maybe it's a star saying, you better vote Democrat or we're going to start a civil war. No, I didn't mean that. You stupid Republicans are so stupid for thinking that. All those things could be triggering events. And you have official historians saying that's how things pop off. Okay, so I want to show you this article. Here you go. Do another share screen. So this article is Washington Post, America's New Secession Movements Aren't a Crime. I'll show you that one more time. This is the quote that's in the cover for this video. So the quote for the cover for this video comes from this article. And what they say in that Washington Post article I just showed you the title of is bits and pieces of California have been arguing for secession from the U.S. for years. Silicon Valley bigwigs, for example, have long talked of forming a new country, originally in search of a libertarian paradise, and then to protest the election of President Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, Trump's 2016 victory led to cries across the deep blue states that the time had come to set up their own nations. So that's the Washington Post pointing out how there are secession movements like the one in California, and California almost seceded completely during Trump's election. Okay, here's another article. The New York Times has a crisis is coming, twin threats to democracy. Let me show you this title again. Democracy challenged came out this month. Crisis coming, twin threats to democracy. Well, what are the, let me do a share screen so you can see that. Sorry about that. New York Times, here's their article. Crisis coming, twin threats to democracy, out this month. You can see that. So let me do that one more time. Just want to show you the article. Okay, so now you see the article. So what are the threats coming to democracy? Well, let's take a look at that. Now, obviously, the New York Times said, well, the Republican Party denies elections, and that's really bad. But the other thing that the New York Times zeroed in on as the crisis of American democracy is something we've talked about since 2018. The second threat to democracy is chronic, but also growing. The power to set government policy is becoming increasingly disconnected from the public opinion. Although the Democratic Party has won the popular vote in 7 of the past 8 presidential elections, a Supreme Court dominated by Republican appointees seems poised to shape American politics. 2 of the past 4 presidents have taken office despite losing the popular vote, and senators representing a majority of America are often unable to pass bills due to a minority. They're talking about Tom, tyranny of the majority, as we've talked about since 2018. The Constitution says states have rights, not necessarily people. Because of that, 35 states in the Midwest and South, who represent a fraction of the total population, will control 60% of America and control the Supreme Court and the Senate and the presidency, which means they can stop any laws being passed, propose new legislation, reinterpret legislation, and you can't do anything about it. So the New York Times, for whatever reason this month, is going, wow, democracy is about to die. Part of it is the Republicans denying election, but the other part is the Constitution itself is screwed up and gives 35 small states overwhelming power to the point that it's not really democracy anymore. The will of the people of a majority don't happen in this country. And that's what the New York Times is saying. We brought that up since 2018. Why is the New York Times deciding to bring up a point that we pounded home 2 years ago? I don't know. Okay, finally, just to show you a little bit, because we're going to keep pounding this. Well, look at this. Joe Biden, just like Donald Trump, building that racist wall. So when Donald Trump did that, that was racism and white supremacy, and Californians were ready to secede. But when Joe Biden does literally the exact same thing as Donald Trump, it's totally cool, and American Democrats have nothing to say. Think about that. Okay, we'll leave it there. We'll check the comments. If there's relevant comments, we'll post them. If they're not, we will not. Let's see here. going on? Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, we don't agree with Kathy either. Digital civil war will be bad. Joe Biden's speech was also bad. You're totally right. Obama did invent the idea of separating Latino children from their parents and invented the idea of concentration camps for kids. Now, the Obama administration tried to pin that on Trump. Trump only expanded the policy created by Obama. And Biden is now continuing the policy that he helped frame as vice president. So Obama invented it with Joe Biden. Then Trump did even more of it. Then Biden came and continued the policy. So really, there's no difference when it comes to the handling of Latino immigrants between the Obama administration and Donald Trump and Biden. Let me write that down. No difference between Obama, Trump, Biden on kids in cages. They're all the same. So Obama, Trump, Biden are totally cool with children in concentration camps. That's a fact. So we would never do that here in California, but Obama and Biden did. And the border wall too. So it's not necessarily when I hate Donald Trump, but it's not necessarily that when liberals in America get upset at him over racism, it's just that it's him. I mean, that's the only conclusion I can come to. He does racist stuff. You call him racist, then you do the same thing and you say nothing at all. Well, maybe you're not that upset about racism. You're just upset that he was in charge, which means you're cool with Latin kids in cages. I mean, when you look at the fact that Nancy Pelosi pushed a little Latina out of the camera in a cruel manner, is this really that crazy a concept to follow? They might be Americans, but they don't share California values. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks for coming out, and we'll see you next time.